Hello, and welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast, where we learn about the ocean, share sea stories, and explore ocean careers. I'm your host, Kara Muzia. Let's dive into today's episode. This episode is brought to you by you. Thank you to those of you who have become patrons of the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast. For less than the cost of a dive tank refill, or a cup of coffee, you can help keep the podcast episodes coming. There's also some fun bonuses for patrons, so be sure to check those out at patreon.com/marinebiolife. That's patreon.com/marinebiolife. Hey, do you want to help the oceans? Have you considered a career in marine biology, but maybe just aren't sure where to start? Head on over to my website, marinebio.life, and subscribe to my newsletter. When you subscribe, you'll receive a free PDF download where you'll learn the 7 steps to becoming a marine biologist without the degree. Hello, mermaids, pirates, ocean lovers, and land lubbers. Welcome to today's show. What do you call a baby whale? A little squirt. A suggestion: if you ever get cold while camping, just stand in the corner of the tent for a while. They're normally around 90 degrees. My guest today is Valeria Vergara. She is a senior research scientist at Raincoast Conservation Foundation, where she co-directs the Cetacean Conservation Research Program. Her main focus? Beluga whales. Originally hailing from Argentina, Valeria studied wolves and other canids during her undergrad and master's degree. It wasn't until her PhD that she switched to the marine world. Valeria is so passionate about her work and shares insight into what beluga whale research looks like, including spending weeks at camp with these creatures. She also shares why belugas are considered the canaries of the sea, why it's important for us humans to be adaptable, and she shares some amazing stories from the field. Please enjoy. Valeria, welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast. I am so excited to chat with you today.
Thank you. Super excited to be here too.
So you are a marine scientist. You've been studying belugas, and I am really excited to get into this because I've been wanting to have somebody talk about belugas on the show for a while. But first, you didn't start your career in the ocean at all. And I'm really curious to hear this. Why science and why terrestrial initially?
That's a great question. Science, because it just couldn't be any other way. I have been interested in the way animals think and feel and solve problems and communicate with one another since I was a little girl, really. I always knew that this is what I wanted to do. So I got a scholarship when I was 19 years old from the Canadian International Development Agency to come to Canada, from Argentina to Canada, to do my science degree in Canada at Trent University as part of the Trent International Program. And it was there that I got my bachelor's degree in biology, and I studied coyotes actually for my undergraduate thesis. And then I stayed at Trent and I did my master's in zoology. And I actually worked with red foxes in rural areas of Southern Ontario. And then I spent a few years just working various jobs, including a few jobs with wolves, for example, a wolf internship in Minnesota. So canids, where I would say my first love. They are, as cetaceans, they're also, highly sociable animals with beautiful, complex social systems. So I was very into that. And for a series of circumstances, when time came to do my PhD, I switched over to beluga whales. It was just a fantastic opportunity that presented itself. And once you start your PhD studying a particular species, often you stay with that species. It's like starting a book that you cannot put down. So I became a beluga biologist.
Yeah, that could be said for your master's as well, and even your undergraduate thesis. They were both canids. So I'm curious, what did that work look like? Were you out in the field, kind of studying these animals and their behavior? What did that look like?
Yeah, I was on the field. For my undergrad, I was in Yellowstone National Park. This was many years ago. It was the beginning of the wolf reintroduction program, where folk were reintroducing wolves into the Yellowstone ecosystem. And I was part of the team that was studying how coyotes would respond to the introduction of wolves into an ecosystem that had been wolfless for a number of years. And I had a little offshoot of that project, which became my undergraduate thesis, which looked at cooperative breeding in large coyote packs. So what are the roles of various members of the packs in raising the young? And then for my master's, I looked at parental care in red foxes, and it was really interesting because I had to find fox dens. You can't study foxes without watching them, and I was at the time very determined to not do anything intrusive. That's still very important to me in my work. I really value studies that are conducted ethically and with, being minimally intrusive. So trying to disturb the animals that you're observing as little as possible, basically. So at the time, I, didn't want to trap them. And so I put ads in all the newspapers of the area saying something like, are you a farmer? Do you have foxes in your backyard? If you do, please stop. Don't shoot them. Call me instead. I want to come study them. And I got all these phone calls from farmers from all over the area. People were so excited to embrace this project and take me onto their land and point their dens of foxes to me, because of course people knew where the dens were. If you are a farmer or if you work the land and you have a family of foxes that has been staying in your land for years, often you know where that den is. And so I ended up having 8 different dens that I could comfortably observe from a good distance. I would either pitch a little tent on a hillside or park my little car at the side of a dirt road. In any case, 8 dens that were observable, that had no trees between where I was and the den, so I could just be very comfortable observing behavior with a spotting scope. And that was my master's. That was essentially the field.
I love it. Getting out in the community and crowdsourcing your research. That's awesome.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So did you know that you wanted to get your PhD right away, or did you take some time between master's and PhD?
No. Yeah, that's a really good question. I took probably about a decade. When I finished my master's, I thought I was done. In terms of not done being a biologist, I love that, but done climbing the academic ladder, so to speak. And it was years later that I started realizing that I missed academia. I missed the thinking. I missed chatting with colleagues and other students. I had things I wanted to research. I became interested in continuing to pursue that path.
Very cool. So you had roles as scientist between your master's and your PhD. Were they all kind of more canid related jobs? Hey, Kara here. I hear it all the time. How do I become a marine biologist? Or my niece wants to help the ocean. Where does she even start? I hear from students, yes, and also nurses, HR professionals, and other mid-career folks who wonder if they could still make their dream of working with sea turtles or sharks come true, wondering if it's too late to answer the ocean's call. Here's what I've learned after 20 years in the field and hundreds of interviews. There's no straight line, no magic degree, and no gatekeeper. You create the path forward. If this sounds overwhelming and vague, I've created 2 tools to help you stop wondering what if and start moving forward with clarity and purpose. The first is my free guide, Be a Marine Biologist Without the Degree. Over 1,000 people have already downloaded this guide and taken their first step towards ocean impact. Inside, you'll find 7 concrete, doable actions to help you get started, whether you're just exploring or ready to make a change. Then there's the Ocean Blueprint. This is a 30-day self-paced course that helps you build your unique path into ocean science and conservation without quitting your job or going back to school. Inside the Ocean Blueprint, you'll get daily prompts to explore your interests, skills, and next steps, a structure that turns overwhelm into real momentum, and a bonus section to root your work into ocean connection. You don't have to wait for a degree, a perfect plan, or permission. Whether you're wading in or ready to take the deep dive, these tools are here to help you move from dreaming to doing. The ocean called. Are you ready to answer? Links in the show notes and on my website, karagracemuzia.com. I can't wait to see the waves you'll make.
Not all of them. Let's see. I had an internship in Minnesota with David Mitch, who's a wolf biologist. So that was, I think, for 6 months. I had a job as a wildlife guide in the Thilon River Sanctuary that's up north. It was a place that was located about 200 kilometers away by float plane from the nearest town, which was Yellowknife. And my job was actually to track wolves in the tundra and locate the areas where they would most hang out, especially their dens, and then bring photographers to the area so that they could inobtrusively observe the wolves. And the same was to be said for caribou and muskox, but it was mostly wolves that needed that kind of energy.
How cool is that?
It was a very cool job. I mean, I stayed up there alone with my dog for days at a time because the person that had hired me would fly, take off on his float plane to get more clients. And I'd be alone in camp with, with my big wolf looking dog. And it was extraordinary. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life, I would say.
That is so cool. Did your dog help you track?
My dog was great. Yeah, I don't know that I can say he helped me track, but he definitely stayed very, very close to me at all times. Was not a barker. Was just this incredible, incredible being. So I felt safe with him. Yeah.
Very cool. What an awesome experience.
It was a great experience. And I'm sure I had a few other jobs. I worked for an environmental consulting company, and I had contracts here and there doing various things, always related to biology, but not necessarily marine biology.
I had seen that you studied baboons in Kenya, and Jane Goodall was kind of like a source for inspiration jumping into the science field. What was that like for you? Was that kind of surreal, like your Jane Goodall moment?
It was a little bit. So the baboon work, I believe, was before my master's. I took a year and a half off between my undergrad and my master's, and I studied baboons in Kenya and humpback whales in Newfoundland. So those were the two stints I did between both degrees. And the baboon work was through a primatologist named Jean Altman, who I also very, very much admired. And yeah, it was another fantastic learning experience. We were in the middle of a savanna in a very small camp, just literally surrounded by African wildlife. And my job consisted of going to the sleeping cliffs every day, where a troop of 30 to 40 olive baboons would spend the night. We would get to the cliffs just before sunrise, before the baboons themselves would wake up. And then we would follow them on their daily journey to obtain food. So they would just walk hours and hours a day, finding food, lifting stones and finding insects under the rock, foraging for fruits in the dry savanna. And we would follow these baboons and we would record maternal behavior, essentially. So yeah, a lot of insight during that job into baboon cognition and intelligence and the complexity of their social lives.
Very cool. It seems like you've done a lot of camping. You spent some time in a tent for your jobs, right? Like you just mentioned, you would get dropped off on a very remote island. You were studying baboons, living out in the African wilderness. I know we'll chat about in a little bit. You've done some with your beluga research. So did you grow up camping? Were you like very comfortable being outside, or is it just like I'm fine with it, and it's not something that you grew up with?
It is not something I grew up with. I grew up in the middle of one of the largest cities in South America, in Buenos Aires. But that said, I grew up with parents that absolutely loved nature and that valued nature, that valued the natural world. And every chance they had, they would take us out into the fields surrounding Buenos Aires. We would spend every summer vacation in a little fishing village in the Uruguay, which is the neighboring country. And we would go for long walks under the stars at night in the isolated beaches. So nature was a part of my childhood, but not in the camping kind of way, but in the sense that I did grow up valuing nature and being taught by parents who valued nature. And I always knew that my life had to be immersed in nature. I never had a doubt about that. I knew I was just a person born in the wrong place, that I just was not a city person, you know? So camping came very, very easy for me. I actually started my camping trajectory when I was still in Argentina, and I was volunteering for the Argentinian Wildlife Fund when I was 17 years old. And we would do expeditions outside of Buenos Aires. We would take, as a teenager at 17, when most teenagers would be coming back from dancing in bars in Buenos Aires at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'd be waiting for a train with my other birdwatcher teenagers. Train to take us out of town, where we would just spend the Saturday or the Sunday looking at birds.
Two different worlds.
Two different worlds. That's right.
That is so cool. So nature has kind of always had your captivation, your attention.
That's right. I would say so.
We're fast forwarding 10 years after your master's, and you're starting to hear the siren song of academia. How did you go about figuring out what you wanted to do for your PhD? Because that is such a huge commitment.
Yeah, very true. I had an NSERC scholarship. I had gotten that NSERC to study Darwin foxes in South America. And I did go to South America I spent about 6 months in Chile working on a Darwin project study. And a number of personal things occurred in the process of setting up this project through the University of Alberta. My father got sick and passed away. I had to interrupt my PhD process to spend some time in Argentina with him and my family. And the NSERC scholarship was kind of put on hold. And about a year and a half, 2 years later, I was able to pick up the scholarship again and resume my PhD work. Really, more than resume, started, I would say, because it had never really gotten started. And in the process of life that occurred, I had realized I didn't have the heart to spend all the time in South America that would be required to do a PhD studying a South American species. It would have involved me spending very, very long periods of time down south. And at the time, I wasn't ready to do that. So I started thinking about the kinds of studies that I would want to lead here in Canada. And cetaceans just literally, they just came to mind, because if you are interested in social behavior, if you're interested in animal communication, cetaceans are just ideal candidates. Their social lives, the complexity of their communication systems, they lend themselves to this kind of work so well. So I started looking into people that were working with cetaceans, taking advantage of the fact that I still had my full scholarship basically to back me up. And Lance Barrett-Leonard, who was at the time the director of the Marine Mammal Research Program at what was then the Vancouver Aquarium Marine Science Center, took me on to study belugas. And the story starts from there.
Hearing you talk about your work with wolves and coyotes and foxes, and kind of knowing a little bit of your background with belugas, I think it's really fun to see the different parallels between all of these different animals and like your research and their communication, right? Like that's kind of what you were studying, is behavior and communication. And then a lot of it seemed like it was more or less seamlessly transitioned into the aquatic world. Very cool. So was it belugas right off the bat?
It was belugas right off the bat. Yep. There was a little bit of funding at the Vancouver Aquarium at the time to study the vocal development of a beluga calf that was about to be born. There was all this excitement about learning how belugas acquire their incredibly extensive or rich repertoire of sounds. So everybody knew back then, as we know right now, that belugas are the sea canaries, basically, and they have that nickname for a reason. They're incredibly loquacious animals, but we knew very little about the acquisition of their sounds? Are they born knowing all this incredibly rich repertoire of sounds, or do they need to acquire the sounds little by little, much like humans do? So that was the gist of the beginning of my PhD. I was a little concerned that it would be a captive study because I actually didn't believe in captivity. So I was nervous. I was nervous about that, about studying captive animals. I didn't know how my heart would take it. But I thought that it would be a great platform to get me into this field and then allow me the possibility of branching out into the field and begin to conduct field studies. And that was exactly what happened. I started out studying this group of captive belugas at the Vancouver Aquarium. And as soon as I had a chance, I began to conduct field studies that became part of my PhD thesis.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
There's so much to this. I think it's really interesting. Yeah, because you were very, even, in your master's early on, you were like, how can I observe these foxes from far away so I'm not, not impeding on their natural habitats? And yeah, and then you get in a PhD program that's like very much not in their natural habitat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But no, it's a good point. So you're able to branch out from there. So you've observed belugas all over Canada. Now, do all belugas kind of have a lot of similarities in how they grow and develop and communicate? I understand that like each individual has their own individual voice, so to speak, but kind of how they grow and develop is more or less the same.
But yeah, I would say how they grow and develop is more or less the same. The aspect of their individual vocal signatures is something that we need to be very careful how to present this. It's preliminary evidence, and we're still working in the St. Lawrence to corroborate this finding. Basically, in the Arctic, where I collected all of these data that seems to point towards belugas having individual vocal signatures, much like bottlenose dolphins, I couldn't tell who was saying what. So what I did is I correlated the number of the diversity of contact calls that I found in a particular group of beluga that would get entrapped in a little pool up the river. And these entrapments happen periodically. So I would correlate the number of entrapped belugas with the number of different contact calls that I would record in that particular entrapment. And the correlation was very, very tight, down to when there was a single beluga, there was a single contact call type. When we had 34 beluga, we had not 34, but almost 30 different contact call types. So the correlation between the number of animals entrapped in a river pool and the number of different contact call types that we would find in that entrapment was very strong, which led us to think that these contact calls are basically individual signatures, very much like bottlenose dolphin signature whistles. And this makes biological sense, evolutionary sense for beluga whales that live in a fission-fusion society and that need to keep track of very important, very long-term relationships in an underwater world where vision is not as effective as sound.
Right.
But we're working on verifying this notion with D-tagged whales in the St. Lawrence estuary. So we'll see what that data tell us.
Something I kind of want to break down a little bit. You mentioned entrapped whales. This is like ice kind of trapping them in these spots. Is that what's happening?
Oh, good question, because there are indeed ice entrapments, but no, this was after the ice would recede. There's a few weeks every year where the area is iceless. Basically, we're talking about Cunningham Inlet. If you look in a map, it's a little inlet on the very north end of Somerset Island, and the belugas would form a very large herds of around 1,000 individuals. So if you put your hydrophone in the water amidst a herd of 1,000 individuals, you don't know who's saying what. You just have a cacophony of jungle sounds. But little groups of, would split off from these very large aggregations and swim upriver. And we don't know why belugas do this, but they would swim up these very narrow rivers and end up in river pools where the tide would go down And the belugas would get trapped in these little pools because they would have basically sandbars on either end. They wouldn't be able to go further upriver because they would have a sandbar blocking their way, and they wouldn't be able to return and join the herd because of the low tide. So they would stay in these tiny pools in groups of one. Well, one is not a group, but one to about 34, I think, was the maximum number of individuals I recorded, and we could drone them. So we would obtain footage of exactly how many little ones, how many adults you had in these groups, and more importantly, you could count precisely the number of animals in these groups, and you could record them over and over again, getting entrapped in these groups. So it was the same circumstances for every single recording.
Wow. I didn't realize that happened. That's really interesting. So, how long were they trapped for? When the tide come up, they were able to swim out, or is it kind of like a longer entrapment period?
Yeah, no, they would swim out without a problem when the tide would start to come up. So they would become entrapped for something like 3 to 4 hours at a time. That was the window in which they just couldn't traverse the sandbar. This is really a case of being ready when you're in the field for anything to happen, for anything to change your plans. And as a field biologist, it is so important to be ready to change plans because the animals haven't read your proposal. They haven't read your book. They don't know what you're there to do. And sometimes things happen that are so unpredictable, but so important to document. I was there to study mother-calf contact calls and to study how belugas communicate in the absence of noise and in a very pristine environment, which was Cunningham Inlet. And I had designed my whole project around that question. And then an entrapment happened. And we got to film the animals and we got to record the animals. And when I was recording the animals in this first entrapment, this was in 2014, I could hear that not every contact call sounded the same. And contact calls are very easy to identify because they sound quite different than the typical beluga whistles and chirps. They sound more like a raspy chainsaw. So they're very easy to pick out from the normal background chatter of the species. I was able to identify the contact calls that were coming through the speaker connected to my hydrophone, and I could immediately tell that there was more than one contact call in there, that there were all these various contact calls that sounded a bit different. And I thought, oh my God, we have nearly 20 whales in this entrapment. I wonder if each one has its own contact call. That came to me literally during the first of the entrapments. And I thought, I need to be ready for more of these entrapments. If this happened once, it might happen again. And it indeed happened again. And so I ended up being able to record and film 14 of these entrapments. So it was a study that it happened. It was planned in the field. It was an opportunity.
That is so cool. And such a good lesson. I mean, for life in general, right? Just kind of be ready to pivot because things don't always go to plan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned you find these animals entrapped via drone, but you still have to drop a hydrophone in the water to kind of hear them, right? So are you able to get closer to these animals if they're in small pools?
Yeah, so I didn't find them with the drone. We literally looked, and I can send you a picture later that shows me looking over the cliff through a spotting scope. So we would, that's where I had my yurt camping out, basically on the top of this cliff, and the beluga area was just right underneath me. So every morning, well, several times a day, I would scope the area to see what was happening in various places of the estuary. And then if anything interesting was going on anywhere, I would grab all my gear and hike up to that area. So this place was hikeable. I could hike from my tent all the way to where the animals were entrapped in the pool, which was on the mud flats. Or sometimes I would use my ATV to get there with all the gear. And then I would deploy the hydrophone. So I had a mobile IC Listen hydrophone that allowed me to deploy it whenever and wherever I needed to deploy it. And I would connect it to a set of little speakers that I had so I could listen to what I was watching and recording in real time.
It seems like these entrapments were like the opportunity to get probably the closest that you're able to get to a wild beluga. Is that right? Like, are you able to approach these animals? I understand that you try to give them their space in order to record their behavior more naturally, but
Yeah, absolutely. Belugas are very curious animals. So I'm going to be frank here. They approach boats. So in the case in Cunningham Inlet, there were no boats in the area. It was a boatless study. We did not study these animals from boats, but the belugas were very, very close to shore. And in Churchill and in the St. Lawrence, it is not unusual to be on your research boat and have the animals approach simply because they're curious.
yeah.
So encounters, so when you're a beluga biologist, fairly close encounters do occur. Of course, we're careful in the St. Lawrence, the distance, the approach distance to belugas has to be 400 meters because they are endangered and because vessel traffic is such a problem. But you do have situations where the belugas themselves will sometimes pop up next to your boat, or when we're studying them from a research tower, like in the last few years, they will come right up to the tower. So you do end up finding yourself in situations where you get a really close look.
Oh, that is so cool. That's so special. You mentioned that the Cunningham Inlet is pristine. Is it protected? And you also said it's boatless. So is it boatless because it's a protected area, or is it just like really difficult to get to?
It's really difficult to get to. It's a very good question. And it is pristine because it's just there's no boat access to the area. And it's just one of the quietest areas that are still accessible to people because there's the northernmost Canadian lodge that sits near the inlet where clients fly into this lodge precisely because the belugas are so near, so people can watch them from shore. Yeah, it's a very, very, very quiet, very pristine area. It's so rare to be able to record belugas without vessel noise.
Yeah.
They're part of the Eastern High Arctic Baffin Bay beluga population. And then the St. Lawrence estuary belugas are part of the St. Lawrence estuary population, which is the southernmost beluga population. And that population is considered endangered. There's less than 900 animals, according to the latest census. And the area is far from pristine. When you compare both areas, you put a hydrophone in the water in the St. Lawrence and you rarely have just the sound of belugas in water. You always have either a cargo in the distance or the sound of ecotourism vessels or personal watercraft, or something is always making noise. And noise travels very, very well in water. So even when boats are at a considerable distance, you can still hear them.
Yeah. So are you noticing differences in behaviors or communication styles or frequencies between the two populations?
We didn't study behavioral differences. A student that did her master's with some of my data, her master's at the University of Manitoba, she unfortunately hasn't published the results yet, although they are available if you read her master's thesis, found that compared contact calls in various populations of belugas, including data from Cunningham Inlet and from the St. Lawrence, from recordings that I had taken in both areas. And she found that contact calls in the St. Lawrence River emphasize higher frequency components, which makes a lot of sense. If you're in a very noisy area, you want to speak at higher frequencies to basically speak over the noise, because vessel noise tends to occur at lower frequencies. So she found a difference in frequency parameters in the contact calls of both populations, but that's about all we did in terms of comparing populations. My PhD student Jacqueline Aubin, who's doing a wonderful study in the St. Lawrence comparing female communities and the way they communicate acoustically, she's looking into this question precisely, which is super exciting because she's comparing recordings from areas that have very different levels of noise within the same St. Lawrence population. So one of the things she's looking into contact call repertoires, she's looking into the possibility of dialects, distinguishing the three different communities, and she's also looking at how noise might impact the acoustic structure of the sounds that belugas make. So very curious to find out what she finds out.
Yeah, that's a lot of different parameters. But that makes total sense. The kind of initial findings is that if there's a lot of background noise, you kind of have to shout to be heard over it. So it seems like that's what the whales would have to do. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, cetaceans, not just belugas, but many other marine mammals have all sorts of compensatory strategies to compensate for noise. And one of them is increasing the frequency of their vocalizations. Another one that's called the Lombard effect is speaking very loudly or louder to be heard above the noise. Another one is to repeat yourself. So, a vocalization that you would generally produce maybe twice, you just keep producing it over and over, or you wait until the noise subsides and then you speak. And so you use these silent beats in between noise bouts to communicate. So there's all these various strategies that are known to be used by marine mammals.
Interesting. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'd want to dive a little bit more into why is sound so important to these whales, right? You mentioned that sound travels just better underwater, but what are they using sound for?
So they use sound to communicate, to find food, to find their way, so to navigate. They use sound for pretty much every aspect of their lives.
Similar to us, right?
Yeah, except we use vision for a lot of
That's true.
it. We rely a lot more on vision. So sound would be to a whale what vision is to a human. In fact, there's a term that biologists coined that is acoustic fog or acoustic smog to describe what happens in noisy environments. It's for whales to navigate in noisy environments would be very much like for a human to try and find its way in very thick fog. And this is because sound travels very effectively in water, much more effectively in water than in air. So it's very easy for whales to use the sense of sound in a marine environment. And it is very important to do so because it is very dark in there, especially for a beluga whale that lives for a large part of its life in the dark, in the darkness of the Arctic nights. So sound is everything to them to mediate all these complex social interactions and social relationships that they need to maintain to survive. They're social animals, and staying in touch with one another is achieved acoustically, basically, more than visually.
Yeah, that makes much more sense. And a lot of your research focused on mother-calf communication. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Were you finding that there was specific, like individual communications between mother and calf?
Yes, so mothers and calves, and this is something I found out through my PhD thesis. They stay in touch through contact calls that they use anytime that they separate and want to reunite, for example. And it takes about a couple of years for calves to develop the fully matured adult-like contact calls. So little calves are not born producing these developed contact calls. They basically produce these soft click trains when they're newborns, and slowly they learn the maternal contact call. And one of the aspects of my work has been to look at the impacts of underwater noise on these contact calls and how far these contact calls can be heard by conspecifics. It was a very telling study. We just published it in July of 2021. And basically, the study suggested that the contact calls of adults are so much louder that they can be heard up to 18 times farther distances than the contact calls produced by little calves, which makes newborn calls much more vulnerable to anthropogenic noise, basically. So we have a situation where vessel noise tremendously reduces the ability of mothers to hear their calves in cases of mother-calf separation. Which of course can be a problem because little calves depend on their mothers for survival.
Right.
So it just makes any potential separation much more dangerous.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned they can't see, so they need to be able to hear.
They need the sense of sound.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. How has your research impacted belugas? I mean, it seems like these contact calls and being impacted by anthropogenic sources, this information coming to light is a little worrisome, and it more than a little worrisome. And it seems like there should be some steps to be taken to protect belugas or to kind of help them in reducing our impacts on their world. Has there been some impacts from your research?
So Nothing new since the research was published, very, very recently. So I'm not sure that there have been new regulations since then. But an area called Basin Marguerite, which is a beluga nursery of sorts, an area of long residency times for beluga mothers and calves, which was where I conducted most of these research, has been declared an off-limits sanctuary during the summer season in the Saguenay St. Lawrence Marine Park. And this means that this area is closed off to boats. Part of the decision was made on the basis of noise impacts on mothers and calves. And this is great. I mean, acoustic sanctuaries is what we need to be creating. Acoustic sanctuaries that are off limits to boats and that are quiet havens for whales are super, super important. But the location of these sanctuaries is key. In this case, you have a sanctuary, in the context of a fairly narrow river, because the other shore is 1.5 kilometers or less than 1.5 kilometers from the edge of the sanctuary, which means that all the boats that need to transit up and down the river, because it's a waterway, do so on the other shore. And there's a lot of echo and reverberation from very steep cliffs on either side. And also sound travels up to 5 times faster in water than in air. So noise hasn't really been reduced a huge amount, unfortunately, in the sanctuary, but disturbance has, which is important. So it's still, it's still great that it's been created. But the location of acoustic sanctuaries is something that really, really needs consideration.
That makes total sense. Location, 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 and buying real estate or in locating sanctuaries.
That's right. Yeah, very much so.
So I have a fun pop culture reference I was kind of curious about. We were talking a lot about, whales use their hearing to see visually. So that was portrayed in Finding Dory a little bit, right? They had that beluga whale that was in captivity and he had to figure out how to use his melon to see. Is that more or less like accurate, or are they just totally off base?
I haven't watched that movie. So I have not, and it's not the first time that I'm asked that question. So I need to sit down and watch that movie to see exactly how that beluga is portrayed. Yeah, but they do use their melon. I don't know if this is what you mean by coining the term melon, how that was used in the movie, but they do use their melon as an acoustic lens of sorts to direct their sounds. And in belugas, that's very easy to see because you actually can see them moving their melon. It's pretty cool.
That is so cool. You can watch them move this giant piece of their head around to in order to hear better.
Yeah, you actually,
That's wild.
Well, not in order to hear better because they receive sounds through their jaw bones, but in order to direct sound better. So they produce sound deep inside the blowhole. There's 2 structures that are called the dorsal bursae complex. It's 2 fatty structures deep inside the blowhole. They're actually called monkey lips. It's an easy term because they resemble the lips of a monkey, or phonic lips you will find in the literature. And that's where sound is produced. And then sound is directed outwards through the melon that they use as an acoustic lens. It has this kind of very fatty substance inside.
So they don't really produce sound from their mouths.
They don't. Yeah, they don't have vocal cords like humans do.
Yeah. Okay, so that's definitely something that the movie's off base with. The beluga in the movie is using its mouth.
Absolutely off base, yeah.
Okay. That's funny. So I want to come back to camping a little bit because I'm fascinated. You spent 5 weeks out, and you've probably done more, but you spent 5 weeks just out studying belugas. What does that look like?
You mean my study in Cunningham Inlet?
Yeah. I mean, I read that you were out in the wilderness studying belugas for long periods of time.
Yeah. So it's different in every place. Last year was the first year of a beautiful camp in an area called Kamouraska in the St. Lawrence River estuary. And my PhD student and my research assistant and myself set up a 5-week or 4-week, I think it was, camp on a desert island, basically, which is an island that belugas use one side of the island, one little bay, very, very often. Pretty much daily, we had them last year. So this was the first time that we set camp on that particular island. We had a tower constructed right on the shore to allow for easy observations above the tree line. And it was extraordinary because we literally had belugas pass through the island with their newborn calves every day that we were there. I don't think there was a day without belugas. And so we were able to photo ID them as they passed parallel to shore. We photo ID'd them from the tower. There was no need to use a research boat, which is always great because it means you're introducing less noise into the environment. Mm-hmm. We set up a whole solar system to power our computers and our gear, our hydrophones. We had a kitchen tent. It was just a really, really great setup and a really great way to spend the summer, basically, in this isolated island in the middle of the St. Lawrence with belugas passing by every day. But it wasn't, it wasn't the Arctic. So there were some dangers that you have when you camp in Arctic landscapes that we didn't have last year. We didn't have to worry about polar bears, for example.
Did you have any encounters?
In Cunningham Inlet, I had a bit of a close encounter with a bear that was a bit curious about my yurt, my tent, but it was very nicely resolved. It was just a young, curious bear that, left me alone as soon as I started making noise. But it can be very nerve-wracking.
Yeah, it's still a bear in your camp.
Yeah, that's right.
That's so crazy. So you just started a new position with the Raincoast Alliance. Could you tell me a little bit about the Raincoast Alliance and what your new role is and the exciting new initiative you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited to be starting a new research program at Raincoast, which is the Cetacean Conservation Research Program. We will be co-leading it along with Lance Barry-Leonard, and we'll be able to conduct a lot of the work that we're excited about under Raincoast's umbrella. I'll continue my beluga work. We will work on killer whales and conservation issues surrounding killer whales. We will continue working on issues of underwater noise. There's a number of very, very exciting projects that we're planning that I'm sure you'll hear more about very soon.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I'm excited for you in the new initiative. Now, I get listeners emailing me all the time about, experiences and how to get internships and are places hiring. Are these projects going to be looking for help in the near future?
Yeah, stay tuned. Absolutely. I'm sure that as the program grows, we will be looking for help. I always need help with my beluga work. Very often is in the form of assistance with sound analysis. So a little bit of background in sound analysis always helps. Getting people to help in the field is what everybody would wish for. But positions are more limited generally because there's little space on boats or on islands. But here and there, we do need people in the field as well. And this goes for the photogrammetry project as well. I'm sure that opportunities will emerge as the program grows.
Excited to see where and how it grows. And maybe we'll have to have you back on in the future to talk about some of the things that you've created and done with the program.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I like to end each episode with a standard few questions. And the first I've brought back recently, and I'm really curious what your answer is. What is your favorite sea creature?
Well, I have to say beluga. I would not be loyal to belugas if I didn't. No, but kidding aside, I have fallen in love with these creatures. When you begin understanding them, when you have the chance to watch them in their natural environment, they are just incredible beings. They're not just beautiful, but they're also incredibly curious. You always have the feeling that they're watching you as much as you're watching them. Their sociality is bar none, they are like the social butterflies of the whale world. So interesting to observe and to listen to. So I would say that's my favorite sea animal.
Very cool. If you were to be given a blank check, unlimited funding, what project or projects would you use it for?
That's a very good question. Right now, just because I'm very excited about the projects that we want to lift off the ground at Raincoast, I would probably use it to commission an environmentally friendly flagship research boat of sorts, that a boat that walks the talk, a boat that supports all of our research initiatives, especially here on the West Coast, but that is quiet and that is carbon neutral or carbon friendly. You know, I have spent years educating the public about underwater noise, and yet a lot of my research is from noisy boats, really. Although I, of course, as I've mentioned, I try to emphasize shore-based or tower-based research in my work. So lately at Raincoast, we have been beginning to dream of an energy efficient research vessel with something with hybrid propulsion systems and solar panels, and also quiet with non-cavitating low noise propellers, which is possible. It is achievable. It is something that can happen if you work with marine architects or engineers. This kind of very green vessel would be possible. So it would be expensive, but it's doable, and I think important. So yeah, I think that would be
I love
my
this
blank
idea.
check project.
I love this idea.
Yeah,
I think that'd be
I
really
love it too.
cool. Yeah, because it's something, boats are
Yeah,
noisy unless you get a sailboat, right? But that comes with its own set of challenges.
yeah. And Raincoast has a wonderful sailboat that is used for a lot of the Raincoast research projects. So this would be a separate vessel, perhaps more capable of going farther ashore, that kind of thing.
Love it. My personal very favorite question to ask is, what is your favorite field story or stories to tell? And this could be the most magical day in the field and you just had gathered amazing data or just had a wonderful beluga interaction, or it could be a day where things didn't quite go as planned, but it makes a really great story now.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Whenever I'm asked this question, like, I had so many wonderful beluga encounters, so it's hard to decide. But I think I'll probably say the beluga stranding, when two adults, a juvenile and a very young little calf, got stranded on a sandbar in Cunningham Inlet in 2014. And it was near midnight, but of course the sun doesn't set at the time of the year, so we had that kind of twilight of near midnight in the Arctic. And we decided to stay with the whales until the tide was high enough to see them safely out of their predicament, basically. And we made sure to stay back from the water's edge quite a ways because we didn't want to disturb the stranded whales. And what was amazing about this circumstance was that we were able to watch the whales cope with this predicament. And every time that the calf would become agitated and you could see the calf becoming visibly upset and vocalizing above water, and I'm sure it felt scared, flapping around kind of thing, we would see the largest female wrap her tail very gently around the calf in a really beautiful, clear sort of embrace. And immediately the little calf would calm down. And so it looked so much like intentional comforting on the part of the adult whale. It was beautiful to watch. The younger of the adults, juvenile, kept trying to push her companion out to the deeper part of the canal repeatedly. So she would get her melon under the other whale and push in an attempt to help free the other whale into deeper water. So just these very clear instances of empathy and cooperation. It just was crystal clear. And then we saw them just when it was well past midnight. We saw them. The tide came up, and beautifully and thankfully we saw them all swim away. I would say that is one of my most beautiful memories.
What a cool story. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Yeah, my pleasure.
At the end of each episode, I like to leave the audience with a conservation ask to go forth and bring into the world. What would you like my audience to take from your episode today?
Something that I always tell people to remember is that the impact from noise can be short-lived. As soon as you turn off the sound, the noise stops. So there is something that can be done about it, which is great, because here we have something of conservation concern that we can put an end to. And you can put an end to these through acoustic sanctuaries. And I've already talked a little bit about the importance of those no-go zones, through speed limits. So reducing the speed of an engine, either of a large vessel or a pleasure craft, is a really effective way to reduce the acoustic footprint of a boat. Implementing ship quieting technologies, and that even just, beyond building a quiet boat, which is my dream, just refits that clean the hull and polish the propeller of a boat can reduce underwater noise by quite a bit. And just decisions that you make in your daily life help to create impactful change. So think about where you purchase things from. Try to buy locally so that items are not shipped from the other end of the world. And that way, your products come from maybe trucks, but not from ships that produce ocean noise pollution. There are things that can be done if we are aware that underwater noise pollution is something that is happening in our oceans today.
Great ask. I like it. If listeners want to find you, connect with you, learn more about you and or your research, where's the best place to do so?
They can find me at Raincoast. I'm sure that there's going to be quite a bit more about our new research program on the Raincoast website very soon.
And then you have a Twitter as well. Can we find you on Twitter?
Absolutely. Yeah. My handle is Marine Valeria.
I'll put a link to that as well as everything else we chatted about today in the show note. Well, Valeria, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Oh, my pleasure. This was a really great conversation. Super fun.
Hey, one more thing. Do you want to dive more into the ocean and marine biology? Need a little guidance on ocean conservation? Head on over to marinebio.life/resources. We've got book recommendations, job posting pages, conference suggestions, and ocean-friendly products. All recommendations have been personally vetted by me, and I will continue to add to the collection as I come across cool things to share. Head on over to marinebio.life/resources to learn more. See you over there. Thank you for listening to today's show. I'd love to hear any insight you've gleaned. Leave a comment in the show notes or send me an email over at marinebio.life. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and of course, share with your friends. If you want more resources for ocean news, including conservation topics and careers, plus personal insight from me that I just don't share anywhere else, join me at marinebio.life and sign up for email updates. Keep after your dreams and making waves in your community. One person can make a difference. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast.